Hey guys, if you watched last week's tutorial, you should now all know how to create convincing looking muzzle flash effects. In today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to complete your gun effects by adding realistic looking bullet hits. Hey guys, hold them up.
Son of a...
Don't worry, he'll be fine. What and how many layers you have to composite to create a realistic looking bullet hit will depend on the situation as well as what your bullet is actually colliding with. So you may need layers for blood splatters, glass fragments, paper pieces, wood chips, sparks, splashes of water. Also, if your camera is moving during the shot, you will have to track the footage to ensure that your layers properly follow the camera's movement. Now, let's get started with the tutorial. Starting with the base footage, we first add the blood splatter effect onto the wall. To make it look like the effect sits behind Ron in the scene, you can either use masking or, what I prefer to do, rotoscope Ron and overlay him on top. The reason I prefer the second option is simply more flexibility. If I need to add other elements behind Ron like the bullet hole in the wall, I can simply place them below this overlay and I don't have to mask them out. To enhance the effect of the bullet striking his shoulder with some force, we add a blood mist cloud on top of the footage. This is really just a dust or smoke element colored red. Next, we add a little bit of debris from the bullet hitting the plaster wall. As it is a short effect and some of the fragments will fly over on anyways, we can place this layer on top. Finally, we can colorize the footage to give it more of a film look. Let's have a look at how we can do all of this in After Effects. I have decided to leave tracking for another tutorial because it can be quite involved and I want to focus on the actual bullet hit effects for now. Still, before we get to the actual effect layers, there's a little bit of preparation to be done. Since we want any blood splatter or bullet hole layers to appear as if they were behind Ron on the wall, we will create an overlay for Ron that we can then place on top of those effects. For this, scroll to the timeline position where the bullet is just about to hit. Select the roto brush tool and then double click on your footage layer. I'm going to pull down the timeline just a little bit to give me a little bit more space. With the roto brush tool, you basically define which parts of the image will be included by marking them with green. You define which parts of the image will be excluded by marking them with red, which you can do by holding down your Alt key while you're painting. The roto brush tool will then try to help you by detecting edges and outlines within the image. There's a lot of information online about the roto brush tool, so I won't go into too much detail here. We basically want to cut out Ron for the duration of the bullet hit. The purple outline shows us which parts of the footage will be visible, and we want this to match Ron's outline as precisely as possible. Since this is a frame-by-frame process, I'll speed this up just so you don't get bored. Once you're done with the roto brush, go back to your composition. One thing I always like to do is to enable the Refine Matte option on the roto brush effect. This smoothes out the edges and adds a little bit of motion blur and just makes it look a little bit less clunky. Because the roto brush effect is slow to process, we want to render this overlay we created. For this, go to Composition, Add to Render Queue. In the export settings, click on the output module and set the file format to AVI. Make sure you export the RGB as well as the alpha channel for the video. I'm going to call this file Ron Overlay. Hit render and wait until it's done. Disable the roto brush effect on your layer and then return to your project view. We can now import this overlay clip into our project and drag it into our composition above the footage. Looks like nothing has changed, but it has. And if you drag the overlay layer left and right, you can see that we now have an outline of Ron on top of our footage. The great thing about this is that we can now position elements behind Ron in the scene very easily. As an example, create a new text layer by going to Layer, New, Text. Type anything you like and then drag this layer below the overlay layer we created. The text now should be positioned nicely behind Ron in the scene without requiring any extra masking. Now that we have the overlay completed, let's get started with the actual bullet hit. The first thing we need to do is add the blood splatter effect behind Ron on the wall. Simply scroll to the time position where the bullet hits his shoulder and drag your blood effect stock footage into the composition. As with my last tutorial, I am using stock elements from the Actions Essential package, but you can find free ones online. Check the video description for some links. Because we spent the time creating an overlay layer for Ron, all we need to do is position the blood effect below this overlay, change the blend mode to color burn and scale and position it properly. Sometimes I use a different blend mode or add a curves adjustment if the color needs some tweaking, but this blood effect seems to fit pretty nicely into our scene. Make sure the blood layer starts at the moment of the bullet hit. If you look closer, you can even see Ron's shadow moving over the blood due to the blend mode we selected. Next, we're going to add the bullet hole. Simply grab an image of a bullet hole and drag it into your composition below the overlay and on top of the blood layer. Position it in the center of the blood effect and I don't think we need to use a different blend mode. This actually looks quite good. Make sure the bullet hole appears at the same time as the blood splatter. Now let's create the blood mist cloud. For this, we drag a smoke element into our composition. Looking at the smoke effect, I can see we need to clean up a few things first though. There are a few sparks at the beginning of the footage and well, since blood doesn't usually come with sparks, let's cut out those first few frames. Also, the effect seems to be a little too long, but we can fix this by fading out the opacity of the layer after about a second or so. Now, to colorize the smoke red, go to your Effects and Presets panel and search for Colorama. Drag the Colorama effect onto your smoke layer. Leave the input as intensity and change the output to ramp red. It looks pretty ugly, but that is mainly because Colorama is currently set to override the alpha channel of your layer. We can fix this by unchecking the Modify Alpha checkbox under the Modify tab. Now, this looks much better. All I want to do is tweak the red colors just a little bit to make the effect a bit darker and have a little bit more of a blood look. Finally, let's add a little bit of debris to the bullet impact. It's a plaster wall, so we will need something that can pass for small plaster fragments. You can use a particle effect, but for this tutorial, this debris stock footage should do nicely. It is up to you whether you want to position it in front of or behind Ron. Personally, I prefer to place this effect on top, simply because it's a short effect and some of the debris would fly over him anyways. I'll cut out the first frame just so the debris doesn't seem to come from Ron's shoulder. Render it out and the effect is complete. And that is all you need to know about how to create great gun effects from muzzle flash to bullet hit. As always, please leave any comments, questions or suggestions in the section below. Until next time, I will see you later. Hey guys, one more time.